Hi everyone, I'm Christina, and today I'm here to talk about how I plan a hike or a backpack and what logistics go into that. First and foremost, I hope that everybody's staying safe and healthy. I know the virus has affected a lot of people, and I just hope that everybody's doing okay. And I'm really excited to share with everyone what I've learned over the years from all my hikes and backpacks, and hopefully, if somebody forgets something and watching this video will help them remember and keep them safer in the mountains. So when I go to plan a hike or a backpack, the first thing that I think about is what kind of trip it's going to be. So when I go through this process in my head, I kind of think about how long do I want the hike to be? Do I want it to be multiple days, or do I just want it to be a day hike? How far away from home is it going to be, and what are the logistics when it comes to transportation? Am I going to have somebody help me drop a car at a trailhead? Because if it's not a loop, you're hiking to a different area and it could be miles and miles away. So you may need somebody to help you kind of leave a car there or pick you up and bring you back to your car after. So I think about that when planning. I also think about, what season I want to hike in, because, winter and summer are very different and they have different conditions. So it all depends on what kind of conditions I want to be involved in. The other thing that I think about is, do I want to gain any elevation? And if so, am I going to be going above tree line? How far? How long? How much exposure am I going to be in? And that kind of goes hand in hand with what the conditions will be, because a lot of the time, if it's winter and you're above tree line for a long time, you're going to need a lot of extra gear to protect your face and keep warm and dry. So those are all things that go into when I plan a trip. Another thing that I think about is hiking time. So how long am I going to be actually hiking on the trail? If it's going to be longer than what I have for daylight, I always make sure that I have, a headlamp or some other form of light. I really recommend a headlamp because, phone batteries can die and whatnot. So you always want to have something that's reliable, and you always want to have backup batteries for that, just in case you end up staying out there longer than you'd hoped. So once I have all of those planned out and I kind of pick where I'm going to be hiking, what time of year, what are the conditions I'm going to be encountering, I start to think about some other things, like when can I actually make this happen? And a lot of that depends on the weather. Especially if you're going above tree line, you're going to need an almost perfect day in order to be fully safe. I know a lot of people like to venture out when the conditions are harsher, there's not a lot of visibility, maybe the winds are high, it's really cold. I like to err on the side of caution and just stick to the presidential range on nicer days. However, you always need to be aware that other conditions can roll in at any time, so you should always be ready for those conditions. So some things that I think about when thinking about weather: I definitely want to check the forecast probably 2 or 3 times before I go, definitely at least once the day of or the morning of. There are some good resources for checking the weather and the forecasts before venturing out around here in the White Mountains in New Hampshire. And some of those are the Mount Washington Observatory's Higher Summits forecast. You can find that online. I know a lot of people use mountainforecast.com. You can always use the National Weather Service. I always like to use more than one, just to compare what everyone's saying and kind of confirm that I'm going to be experiencing those conditions and just doing the best that I can to make sure I know what's coming. So when you're looking at the forecast, you're going to be wanting to look for a few different things. First off, precipitation. Is it going to be raining? Is it going to be snowing? And something that a lot of people don't think about is, are you going to be in the clouds? Because that can actually have moisture build up on your clothes, and especially something like this down jacket. Being in the clouds all day, this could get soaking wet, and the feathers inside could get all saturated, and it could get cold, and it just wouldn't be good. So it's something you want to be aware of. You're always going to want to carry some kind of rain gear anyway, just because, if you get wet, you're going to be cold pretty much year round if you're above tree line in the White Mountains. With the wind and stuff, it just whips the warmth right away from your body, and you don't want to be putting wind and water together, and that's just a recipe for hypothermia. So you're always going to want to carry some kind of rain gear no matter what. So when I think about wind, you look at these forecasts and you see 40, 50, or 60 miles an hour, and in your head that doesn't seem like a whole lot, and I didn't think so either for the longest time, but actually when I went up for my Mount Washington edu trip through the observatory, and I was up in literally 107-mile-an-hour winds in the dead of winter, you get a whole new appreciation for how much wind can blow you off your feet, especially on the boulders up there. If they're slippery, it can toss you off balance, and it's a really easy way to break an ankle. Even in like 60-mile-an-hour winds, 50, 60 miles an hour, it can throw you off balance, especially if you're like a smaller person, and that's just a recipe to get hurt. So that's something to keep in mind. It's also very tiring, always trying to balance yourself on boulders up there when you're getting blown in opposite directions. So next up, let's talk about cloud cover. I know a lot of the time when you go above tree line in the White Mountains, you're going into the clouds, above the clouds, but something to keep in mind that sometimes not a lot of people think about is the visibility when you're inside of a cloud. Sometimes that can be okay, and you can see the next cairn, you can get to it okay, you can navigate around all right. It's a little disorienting, but you can get there. But sometimes a cloud can be really thick, and you can't even see the next cairn. Sometimes you can't see 50 feet in front of you, and that can be a real problem for trying to find the trail, especially up above tree line where it's all boulders and there's not really an established trail and you're only following cairns. And you can get lost very easily while doing that, especially if you don't have good navigation or map and compass skills. So that's definitely something to keep in mind if you're going above tree line and it's a cloudy day. So let's talk about temperature next. I know a lot of people, they go out in winter and they prepare to be in cooler conditions with a puffy jacket or some other form of insulating layer. They have their shell layers. However, it's actually more common for someone to need a rescue off a mountain in cooler conditions, kind of like those in-between season conditions where it's like 40s, 50 degrees, and it's wet out. Maybe they're in a cloud and there's moisture collecting on them. Maybe it's raining. But those days when people get moist or wet and they didn't really prepare for very cold temperatures, maybe they were at the base, it was a nice 70 or 80 degree day, and then they gain 4,000 feet of elevation and it's 30 or 40 degrees. They're getting wet and all of a sudden they're freezing, hypothermic, and they need a rescue. So it's actually more common to see that than somebody in the dead of winter that's prepared to be out in 0-degree conditions. So just keep that in mind. I mean, we see a lot of rescues, guys, in the White Mountains where people don't bring enough layers. They don't expect it to be as cold or windy at the top of the mountain as it is at the base. And it's a real problem. So year round, you're gonna need insulating layers. I mean, the warmest temperature ever recorded on the top of Mount Washington was in the 70-degree range, and that's not even including wind. So you really are gonna need insulating layers year round, at least bringing them, especially if you're gonna find yourself overnight somewhere. And it doesn't always have to be you getting hurt, right? You could find somebody on the trail, you need to sit with them, you need to help them out, and then boom, you're overnight and it's getting cold. So you're always going to want to be prepared for things like that. Let's also talk about exposure for a second. Because if you're going above tree line, like in a place like the Presidential Range, where you're going to be exposed for a very long period of time, you're going to need to think about things like getting burnt by the sun year round, especially in the winter. Actually, I remember a time where I had a balaclava on and there was that little opening underneath your nose, and the sun actually reflected off the snow and burnt just the bottom of my nose. So you need sunscreen year round. Even if it's cloudy, the sun can get through, you can get burnt. In a place like that where you're so exposed and you're closer to the sun, theoretically, you're gonna get burnt. When you're choosing a season, or you're in a season and you're thinking about going on a hike or backpack, there are some special situations that you need to think about that come with each season. Let's talk about a few of those. So summer is usually the time when people hike. A special situation that you could run into in summer is that you don't have enough water, right? So if you're going on a long hike, 10 or 20 mile day, you have it planned out, you have 3 liters of water or 4 liters of water, and you run out right in the middle of it. Do you know where you can get water along the trail? Do you have a filter that you can filter water with? Luckily in the White Mountains, we have the White Mountain huts, so a lot of the time you can refill there. But you should always have a water filter in the summer, so you can always be refilling your water, making sure you get enough, making sure you drink enough, and make sure while you're drinking that amount of water, you're also intaking salt. So I know all of the really good hiking snacks at REI and EMS, they're all very sweet. They're like fruit snacks and they're all really yummy sounding, but what you're actually going to want is something salty. So I actually hiked on Mount Whitney this past fall, and I brought all those sweet snacks, and within a day I was sick of them. And I actually brought a bag of like sun chips and corn chips, and like it was the star of the show, man. Like it was so good. It made me feel so good taking in those electrolytes and making it so that I could actually absorb the water I was intaking. In the winter, you're obviously going to have cooler temperatures. There's going to be a lot of snow around you. Bring insulated layers, things to keep you warm and dry. Those are going to be the life of the party, right? Those are going to save the day, save your life. In the winter, you're also going to be experiencing some different conditions. So you could be walking on icier conditions or snowier conditions, and there are some things that you should think about bringing depending on where you're going and what types of conditions you think you may run into. And you can go and check recent trail conditions online. There's a website called New England Trail Conditions. Lots of people post their reports there from their hikes, and you can see on there a lot of people report if there's like post-holing or super icy conditions, and you can kind of get a feel of what you need to bring in advance. So a lot of the time, everybody brings micro spikes in the winter just in case. It just makes it more stable, less likely to slip, less likely to get hurt, and they don't weigh that much. So they're great to bring pretty much from October to June, really, in the whites. Another thing you need to think about is snowshoes. A lot of the time down in southern New Hampshire, Massachusetts, areas like that, we're getting rain, but a lot of that rain up north is going to be lots of snow. And if you don't bring snowshoes when there's new snow, you can't really break out a trail. You're going to be post-holing. It's going to be exhausting. So you really need to bring your snowshoes if there's new snow. Also, if the trail is soft. So if there's been a little bit of melting, the monorail's kind of unstable, people are post-holing, their feet are going through the snow and sinking, that's also a good time to wear snowshoes, just to keep the trail in better condition and keep you safe from falling through. So if you're going to be going above tree line in the winter and you think you might be encountering hard glaze, like trail conditions where you think you're worried about slipping and falling for a long period of time, like on the summit cone of Mount Washington, you're going to want to think about bringing crampons, which are basically just a far more aggressive micro spike, if you will, and an ice axe possibly to self-arrest and stop yourself if you do fall. However, I will caution you with an ice axe, if you haven't practiced using one or you're not used to it, you've never seen one before, I would just forego using it altogether because it can actually hurt you pretty badly if you do it the wrong way. There's a lot of pointy ends on an ice axe, and if you swing that around the wrong way, you could put it right through yourself by accident, and it could do more harm than good. So if you're not used to using one, or if you haven't gotten out and been able to practice with one, I would just forego using that altogether. In the spring, conditions can be really bad. The snow's usually still there in the whites. The monorails are degrading. It's falling apart like we talked about. Might need snowshoes to walk on it. And it's exhausting to always be slipping off and kind of always unstable. It's very easy to get hurt in a condition like that. And another thing to think about in spring is high water crossings. Any streams are going to be much, much higher with all of the rain that we get in spring and all the snow melting. And sometimes they're going to be impassable. Even if in the summer they dry out, all of a sudden in the spring, you can't cross it or you'll get swept away. I mean, literally, they get really, really high. So it's something to think about when planning a trip. Take note on if there's any water crossings. See if people have written about it in like a trail report that they've done recently. Just be aware of when they're there. It may be something that you need to turn around for in the spring. Sometimes they get very, very high, and literally are raging rivers. The other thing to think about when looking at the season that you're in is daylight hours, because we know that in winter the daylight hours are much, much shorter than in summer. So that's something to think about as well. We also get a lot of rescues in the Whites because people get lost. They're wandering around for a long period of time, and then all of a sudden it's dark and they can't see, they don't know where they are, and they can't continue because they don't know. I would actually recommend bringing a headlamp on all of your hikes, even if they're day hikes. Like I said, just in case if you get stuck outside with someone, you can at least get around and see where you are. That's just one of the essentials that I bring every time. So let's talk about if you're planning to go with someone or if you're planning to go alone. Now, a lot of people, they say, never hike alone, it's not safe, don't do it, you could get hurt, nobody could find you, things like that. And there definitely is more risk with hiking alone. However, if you do it safely, if you're well prepared, you have enough stuff to stay outside for a day, a couple of days, stay warm, stay dry, you have water, another reason to bring a filter, you have enough food, a shelter, and if you've shared your plan with other people and people know where you are, especially if you have like one of those Garmin devices where people can track where you are or a spot, those are great, but you can definitely hike alone as long as you do it safely. Now, if you want to bring someone else with you, I would recommend doing your own little screen of them, if you will. That doesn't mean, don't hike with your friends, sit down and question your friends about hiking. It just means kind of get to know their abilities, make sure you're comfortable with them. If they have any medical issues, know what they are, know if they have any medications in their packs that if you need to get to it quickly, you can, like an EpiPen or an inhaler, or something like that. If you need to get to something, make sure you know where it is. And make sure you guys have a plan. If something goes wrong, what are you gonna do? If somebody gets injured, if somebody gets hypothermic, if somebody gets heat stroke, what's your plan? And lastly, I would just make sure that you can count on them. You can trust them. Hopefully, if you're doing a big hike, you've hiked with them in the past, so you know how you guys are together as far as teamwork goes. And yeah, just kind of get to know their abilities, and make sure that you're comfortable with everything. And if you ever feel uncomfortable in any way, don't feel bad about scrapping the hike. Other things that I think about when I'm planning a trip, I pick bailout points. So especially if it's a longer trip, 10, 20 miles, I'll have 3, 4, 5 different points where if something goes wrong, I can get down quickly. I don't have to continue on the whole hike. There's a trail to the side where I can get to a road quickly. So just kind of study the map in advance, know where you're going to be turning, know where you are kind of at all times. Okay, I'm going to be following this water for a while, then I'm going to be gaining some elevation. Just kind of have an idea of where you are, have some ideas for bailout points just in case something goes wrong. Hopefully you don't need them, but they're good to have just in case. On a backpacking trip, I always have like a mileage plan, is what I call it. And basically I just kind of study the map and go through each day. And I say, okay, the first day I'm going to hike 12 miles and stay at Guyot Shelter. Then the next day, I'm going to hike 12 miles and stay at Greenleaf Hut. Then the next day, I'm going to hike 10.5 miles to my car. And I know each day how long I'm going for, where I'm staying the night, and I've made the reservation if I need to. Another thing to think about is what kind of wildlife and insects are you going to encounter, right? Because if you run into a black bear or a moose on the trail, a lot of people wouldn't know what to do. And that can be a problem. So make sure you study up on all the wildlife that you could encounter, especially the predator type animals that could hurt you. Make sure you know how to deal with it if you see one on the trail, because you're going to be a deer in the headlights if you see one and not know what to do. As far as insects go, bring bug spray in the spring, in the summer. The black flies above tree line can be bad. And then also just have like a Benadryl or some kind of something to treat you know, a sting or a bite or something like that, it can be an issue if someone is allergic to something. Hopefully it's not a bad one. If it is, hopefully you know where their EpiPen is. So when I have everything kind of laid out for my hike or my backpack, that's when I pack my pack. I start to think about what I'm gonna bring. If you guys want to see a video on what I typically pack for a day hike versus a backpack, let me know. I can definitely do something like that for you guys. And then I just double check everything just to make sure I didn't miss anything, because if you're traveling into the backcountry 15 or 20 miles and you need a rescue or something goes wrong, it's going to be hours, possibly days before you can get help, and you really need to be self-sufficient out there. So just double check everything. The extra 10 minutes is worth it, I promise. And then lastly, I leave my whole plan with 2 people that I trust. Usually it's my parents, possibly my sister, a friend, my boyfriend. Just leave it with 2 people just in case something happens. And another thing that I've seen people doing, I have not done this, but I think I might start doing it, is leaving it in your car just in case they find your car at a trailhead. They can see where you are, they can see your plan, and they don't need to start searching for you if, you know, that's what needs to happen, so they know exactly where you are. So that's typically what goes into planning a hike or a backpack for me. I am definitely a morning person, so I try to get to the trailhead as early as possible. A lot of the times it's in the dark. And, you know, I always start the day off with some kind of breakfast. I know a lot of people are gonna get after me for this, but I love a good Pop-Tart, and I always drink like at least a liter of water before I get on the trailhead. So I'm well hydrated and I'm ready to go. So that's my process for planning a trip, planning a hike or a backpack. The only other thing I would add is if you're hiking, you know, somewhere that's not local and you need to look into permits or reservations or local laws, like if you need to be carrying a bear canister or bear spray, just know that in advance and kind of be prepared for that. But other than that, that's my process, guys. Thanks for watching. If you liked what you saw, hit thumbs up and subscribe below so I can keep making videos like this for you guys. And let me know what you're looking forward to in the future in the comments. I hope everybody's staying healthy and safe and continues to do so, and I look forward to the next one. Happy trails!